The next item is assisted dying, unbearable suffering, lodged by Deputy Southern. The main respondent is the Minister of Health and Social Services. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they're of opinion to agree that the draft Assisted Dying Jersey Law 2000, if adopted and once in force, should be extended to include persons suffering from an incurable physical medical condition which is not terminal, that is giving rise to intolerable suffering and that cannot be alleviated in a manner the person deems to be tolerable, and to request the Minister for Health and Social Services to undertake the necessary changes to the law.
Deputy Southern.
Good evening. What a joy it is to be here so late. I've got less is more inscribed at the top of my paper. But what I find is that if you promise to have a short speech, it's never short enough. People demand it. Oh no. So it rarely happens. 20-odd years, my first proposition on school milk. Well, I remember it. Although nobody else in the room, yes, they might, yes, would remember it. To dive straight in and talk about the comments made by the Minister about assisted dying. In May 2024, the Minister voted in favour of Route 2 proposals presented as part of P18/2024, i.e. voting in favour of permitting assisted dying for persons with non-terminal, incurable physical medical conditions who are experiencing unbearable suffering on the grounds that he believes it is a humane and compassionate response subject to all the necessary safeguards. To which I have to ask the Minister, is it no longer humane? Because what you're replacing it with is more of the same. And members will remember that back in May 2024, they voted on the two routes put forward for assisted dying. Route 1, to be made available to those who are terminal within 6 months and experiencing unbearable suffering. And Route 2, to be made available for all those experiencing unbearable suffering. Route 2 was rejected, but not overwhelmingly. A vote of 19 to 27, with 3 absentees. I don't intend to recap on the discussions at the time. We've had these debates, or the arguments presented then. This proposition seeks implementation of Route 2 in due course, not only because it's the right thing to do for those experiencing unbearable suffering, but because the current law, whilst a major step forward, leaves us open to potential claims of discrimination under the European Convention on Human Rights. Because that's what the assisted dying law does. The law differentiates clearly between patients who are experiencing unbearable suffering, dividing them into those who are terminal and those who are not. The question is whether that division is justifiable. I would argue that it's not. The relevant articles under the EHCR are Article 8, right to respect for private and family life, and Article 14, prohibition of discrimination. Importantly, read when in conjunction with Article 8. So we ask first, is Article 8 engaged? Is the right to respect for private and family life maintained? Is, for example, a refusal of an assisted death a breach of Article 8? Does the fundamental right right to choose how and when you will die fall under Article 8 of the EHCR. There are many judgments on this and references, and they have developed over time. Even those judgments that do not consider there has been a breach of Article 8 do not debate that a person's end-of-life decisions engage Article 8, as is clearly detailed within the judgment, in this case of Mortier versus Belgium in 2022, where it says, an individual's right to decide by what means and at what point his or her life will end, provided he or she is capable of freely reaching decision on this question and acting in consequences, is one of the aspects of the right to respect for private life within the meaning of Article 8 of the Convention. More significantly, updating that to a gentleman called Karzai versus Hungary in 2024, the decision by a terminally ill patient not to live until the natural end of a life that is characterized by suffering is part of the patient's right to self-determination. The right to decide upon one's own death is to be enjoyed by all persons, irrespective of whether they are healthy or ill, whether terminally, as in the art of medicine currently stands, or not. Please note there then, it's one of the arguments that I put forward. The right to decide upon one's own death is to be enjoyed by all persons, irrespective of whether they are healthy or ill, and whether terminal, as part of medicine currently stands. So the next article, which we need to look at, Article 14, is the prohibition of discrimination. It is important that Article 14 is considered in conjunction with the case law of the European Court on Human Rights, namely that in order for an issue to arise under Article 14, there must be a difference in the treatment of persons in analogous or relevantly similar situations with regard to the enjoyment of the rights and freedoms. Such a difference in treatment is discriminatory if it has no objective or reasonable justification. Again, this gets a bit tricky. Does the law treat people differently? I would argue the answer is yes. Terminal or non-terminal. We keep making that same decision. Are we treating a group of people, all of whom are experiencing unbearable suffering, differently with an objective and reasonable justification? I would argue that we are not. We have spent considerable time over the last almost 10 years now, I believe, debating and discussing the safeguards that need to be in place for patients, their concerns, and additional processes that will be implemented. For me, these safeguards represent protection for all, and therefore a level playing field for all. These safeguards remove the reasonable justification for treating non-terminal patients in a different manner to terminal ones. So where does that leave us? It leaves us wide open for an appeal through the EHCR under Article 14.
Is that you, Deputy?
And
I think that'll be a £10 penalty.
I got a smile. I know it wasn't deliberate. Here I would like to quote Alistair Henderson, who, you say? The Commissioner of the Equality and Human Rights Commission and advisor to the Lords and the Commons. Alistair Henderson, Commissioner of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Why is he important? That same commissioner that the State's Minister behind me states does not raise human rights concerns about the UK bill, about our bill, for that matter. From his oral evidence given at the Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill Committee in the House of Lords, he says, and this is, I quote verbatim, the argument would go on something like this. If you have more than 6 months to live, is a personal status for the purposes of Article 14. The law on assisted dying discriminates against people who have more than 6 months to live, contrary to Article 14. There is no obvious reason for setting the limit at 6 months, as opposed to 9 months, 12 months, 24 months, or whatever, particularly because someone who has longer to live might suffer more, and therefore you need to justify that somehow. It is important to say, he continues, it's important to say that there is a wide range of views on whether that argument will succeed. I know that the government's memorandum, for example, said the government's view is unlikely to succeed because of the wide margin of appreciation given by the court on all issues to do with dying. So that is important to say. No one can tell you whether the argument will succeed. It is important for me to say, for me, in that case it's me, the Commissioner, it's important for me to say that the argument could be made, and listen carefully, and almost certainly will be made by somebody. And it cannot be guaranteed that whatever Parliament says, remember this is a political decision as well as a social one, whatever Parliament says, it will not be accepted, it may not be expanded by the courts. It almost certainly will be made by somebody. This is the Commissioner saying somebody's going to look at that door we've left open and try and open it more by running a bill past the courts. And I return to the end of the statement from the Minister. Item 10, the Minister notes that, as referenced in P46 of 26, there are arguments and counter-arguments related to the application of Articles 8 and 14 to assisted dying legislation. However, it is nevertheless the case that it cannot be asserted that the draft law is non-human rights compliant because it only provides for persons with a terminal illness. Nor should a decision be made to extend the eligibility criteria on the basis of a speculative ECHR challenge. A speculative ECRH challenge. But that remains the case that we are implementing a two-tier system. And the decision we need to make is whether it's justified or whether it is open to appeal under ECHR. We don't know what the findings of such an appeal might be, but we should not be leaving ourselves open to acting in a discriminatory manner, and I believe we are. In conclusion, I will repeat one of my earlier statements. This proposition seeks the implementation of Route 2 in due course, not only because it's the right thing to do for those experiencing unbearable suffering, but because the current law, whilst a major step forward, leaves us open to a claim for discrimination under the ECHR. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? Yes, sir. Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? Right, Arbor St Saviour.
Where to begin? So I've had the privilege of being in this assembly for I think 21 years now, along with colleagues, beg your pardon, the Constable of St Lawrence and Deputy Gorst were the last of the 2005 intake. Over the years, many people have said to me, "What do you think of Deputy Southern?" And I would say the same thing. Good researcher. It's a compliment there, so they won't be coming very often. Of many things. But, and I did support the milk, by the way, for schools, free milk for schools. This is a tricky one for me because it's in the middle of the paragraph. And it's to agree that the draft-assisted dying law, Jersey Law 2000 blank, if adopted, once in force, should extend to include persons suffering from an incurable medical condition, brackets, which is not terminal. There's a stumbling block there for me that I'd say it's something I have a big problem with. I think the pain clinics and the hospice do a fantastic job with pain relief. My own mother in her late 80s had cancer, and in those days people were allowed to administer their own morphine. So I went in to see my mother, and we were chatting away. She had a little wince, and just a minute, clicked the dial a bit. Ah, that's better. So good pain relief is out there, and there's the last vision I have of my mother is sat down smiling and waving with two hospice nurses by her side, and I cannot praise them enough. That I say good medical care is out there, but sadly I cannot support this proposition as it is, as they say, the slippery slope and one step too far. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor Tarr. Deputy Barbara Ward.
Thank you, sir. It becomes no surprise to members that I rise to speak against this proposition, which in my view is most unacceptable and coupled with poor timing, as the ink is not yet dry on the recent agreement for the assisted dying law. The whole concept of widening the recently agreed assisted dying law, which includes the waiver element, is a clear demonstration of the drift and extension that I warned about in my previous proposition speech, which was on the removal of the waiver aspect. This actually, by introducing Route 2, is purporting to be likened to the Canadian and some of the European models, which is really, really worrying. Do we know what diagnostic illnesses, diseases, and the age range would fit the criteria of unbearable suffering? Would the list be for people with mental health issues like depression, dementia, stroke, head injuries, people with disabilities, the homeless person, people with an eating disorder? Where would the list start and where will it end, sir? I am really very concerned. Sir, I'm unsure why this proposition has actually been put forward at this time. Sir and members, thank you for listening, and I urge you to vote against this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. We've moved into different territory from the debate that we recently had on the assisted dying law. And the main issue for me that I would be considering is this question, can pain be managed? And should you keep people in pain? Is it ethical to do that, to keep them indefinitely in pain? And there's two things I'm going to raise in that context, because I do believe that you don't need to keep people in pain. You can put them in comas. You can find solutions in the meantime. So pain doesn't necessarily have to be totally enduring. But one thing that really impressed me a lot in terms, or at least it made a huge impression on me, and many, I suppose, who have worked, in areas of psychology, is a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I don't know how many States members read this book, but it was written by a German psychotherapist who had the unfortunate situation of being a Jew during the Holocaust. And he was basically rounded up by the Nazis. And at the time that happened, he had a manuscript of a book in his pocket. And his first thought was, when they took it away, his coat away, I'm going to have to write that manuscript again. When you read the book, you realise, and I promise this is not a dystopian story, this individual was taken from concentration camp to concentration camp. And there comes a point when you actually think, how is he surviving that? And he asked himself the same question. And that made him explore, why were some people surviving, some people dying? And that gave the title to the book, Man's Search for Meaning. And the whole basis of modern psychology is based on the discovery he made, which was that the actual ability of people to endure experiences came down to the meaning that they gave them. And when he eventually left this concentration camp, he indeed treated people as a psychotherapist and people in pain, exploring what new meaning they could give to pain, and they found it gave, it was different. Also, I haven't actually made this admission to States members because enough of them avoid me already, is that I'm a trained hypnotherapist and have learned to manage pain myself. Now, I'm not saying that everybody's going to be able to manage pain, but what I am going to say is that I think we have to try a lot harder, very hard, in order to help people endure that. So it's with that hesitation that I feel uncomfortable with extending assisted dying to this category. Even though I did support the original proposal at the time, the Minister for Health made his original propositions, which of course the States Assembly too felt that unbearable suffering was perhaps just a bit too far for us to work through at this stage, and it would indeed be perhaps better to see how this current system works now. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Tombini, Minister.
Sir, before I start, I'd just like to apologise to members and particularly to Deputy Southern for the interruption. I'd just say that I thought I'd turned everything off, but this was a reminder alarm call to take eye medication, so I must apologise. Sir, I think members will probably appreciate that this proposition puts me in a pretty difficult position. It's no secret that I fully support the principle of allowing assisted dying for those suffering, for those with unbearable suffering, and I campaigned for it very actively before becoming involved in politics. However, we're now in a very different position to the one that existed at that time. Over the course of the past 5 years, much discussion, consultation, and debate has taken place, resulting in the comprehensive new law that we passed only a few days ago. During the course of that process, the issue of unbearable suffering was discussed throughout, and this Assembly decided not to support it. This was disappointing to me personally, but it was our collective democratic decision, and it's that by which we're obliged to abide. So I think it fair to assume that the majority of Islanders were supportive of the law that we did pass, but there was a sizable minority for whom the decision was difficult to accept. Concerns were expressed about safeguards, and references were made to the new law being the start of a slippery slope. Whilst from a personal perspective I don't share either concern, I think it's important that we respect the decision that's been made and at the very least allow time for the new law to be introduced and to demonstrate that the safeguards work and that overall it's fit for purpose. Indeed, there's to be a review 3 years from now, and to me this would have been a more appropriate time for this to be considered. So I acknowledge the sincerity and compassion that underpins Deputy Southern's proposition, but to me this was not the right time for this to be debated. Indeed, I'm almost certain that it will result in a much stronger vote against, and not only will that set back the argument for it, but to some extent it threatens to undermine public confidence in what's otherwise been a thorough and positive process. So I'm also reliably informed that it's likely to cause a great deal of confusion in obtaining royal assent. So for all of those reasons, sir, I would urge members at this stage not to support this proposition.
So would the Minister take a point of clarification?
Will you take a point of clarification? Minister? Yes, Deputy.
Could the Minister explain why it is that he thinks this would frustrate the royal assent being given?
Minister.
Well, it was a point that was raised to me only during the tea break, and I was informed of that. So I can't actually elaborate on that, but I was informed by the person that's spent 5 years drafting all of this that it would. So I have to say I've taken that on trust, and you have to make of that at this stage what you will, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Conataba St Mary.
So could I just say that perhaps the Attorney General might be able to advise on that? No?
Well, if asked, he will, I'm sure, can answer his question on that point. Yes, Conataba St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I had actually put my light on before I realised that the Minister himself was going to speak, but he's already, my main point of reference was the final words of the statement containing his comments. The Minister does not support any proposal to extend the criteria at this particular time. It will only serve to confuse and may well undermine the integrity of all the work done to date. And it's that last aspect which I emphasise, sir. By general account, the debate we had a matter of weeks ago was viewed very well in the international press elsewhere as having been conducted with great sensitivity. Even those who were not in favour of the assisted dying process acknowledged that. And I would like to finish on that note. One of the platforms of those who were in favour of assisted dying within the limitations was that, no, there is no slippery slope. That was one of the main fears put forward by various people, and here we are a matter of weeks away embarking on that slippery slope. It will terrify, I think, certain sectors of society if this is allowed to go through. The question of coercion comes into play. Coercion, when you have a maximum of 6 months to live, is one thing. When it's open-ended, that will be a permanent fear, and I really think that we are jeopardising the respect that we had in passing assisted dying the first instance if we do not reject this and reject it with a substantial majority. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conataba. Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I have to say I really don't think the suggestion that this debate or proposition would complicate royal assent being given for the assisted dying law that we've just passed carries much water. That law is a law in and of itself, and the Assembly went through its normal constitutional process to approve that, send it on, and we await for the next stage in that constitutional process to be completed. That being completed in and of itself doesn't somehow undermine any potential constitutional safeguards for going further on assisted dying at some point in the future, because when it comes to that, if it comes to that, we would have to go through a substantial process all over again to do that. So I am very confused by the suggestion that a debate and approval of this would in any way complicate the approval of a law that is a definitive law in and of itself, and can only be amended through the same constitutional processes anyway. So I'm disappointed that that argument has been raised. But the reason I wanted to stand up to speak, sir, is because the suggestion of the slippery slope has now been mentioned in this assembly. It's one that's been mentioned in some of the correspondence that we've had from members of the public. And in the past, whenever I've spoken in support of assisted dying, I have never mentioned the slippery slope argument, because I've always considered it to be a complete misnomer, and it ignores that this assembly, as the lawmaking body of the island, is sovereign, is not bound by what a previous assembly decides to do, and it cannot bind what a future assembly chooses to do. We decide what laws we want as and when we want them. We can go forwards if we like, we can go backwards if we like. The idea that making some decision today makes another one inevitable, and you go down a slippery slope is just not correct. And if that were a reason for not adopting laws or policies, that would be an anti-democratic thing, because we can choose to go further or we can choose to roll back in the future. That's our right as a democracy, and that's a good thing, and it is as it should be. And if there is a majority among the public and then therefore among their elected representatives that a different form of assisted dying is one that's preferable to the one that's just been adopted, then that's entirely legitimate and democratic. And I don't think that it's right to criticise that as a prospect, because that's how our democracy works, and it's absolutely fine. If you don't like a proposition or a proposed law, you vote against it. But I won't vote against this. I'll vote in favour of it because it accords with what I believe. I believe in what Deputy Southern is proposing. I don't think it harms the work that has already been done, that has been approved by the Assembly and can go on. And the reason I'm in favour of it, and just to take the kind of middle phrase in the proposition, it refers to a condition that is giving rise to unbearable suffering that cannot be alleviated in a manner the person deems to be tolerable. So opposing it is to ask to bear the unbearable and tolerate the intolerable. And I simply can't get over that, and I can't see why others ought to impose unbearable and intolerable suffering on people who have the complete capacity to decide that they would prefer something different. It goes back to the arguments that we had about agency in the debate on the assisted dying law. They are as applicable for what we previously called Route 2 as they were for the Route 1 that we adopted. And Deputy Southern is within his rights to bring that and ask us to reconsider it. I lamented the decision to reject Route 2 at the time, and nothing in my mind or heart has changed on that. I would like to see an assisted dying service that doesn't force people to go through unbearable suffering and make them tolerate it, when a humane and well put together process with appropriate safeguards that will come later in the process could theoretically be on offer to them. I think that it's not a right thing to do to treat another person, and it's for all those reasons, sir, that I strongly support the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Elves.
Thank you, sir. I recently came across a story about a young man called Samuel, who's 21. He's an Austrian man who was diagnosed with ME, and also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, who chose to pursue an assisted death. I'm just going to read what I read about him. So 12 days before his death, he actually posted on a online forum explaining his condition and speaking about the lack of recognition for this illness. Samuel was confined to his bed 24 hours a day in complete darkness. He wore double ear protection because light and sound caused what he described as unimaginable pain. Suffering from extreme fatigue, he could no longer speak, look at a screen, or listen to music or podcasts. Even the most basic daily tasks like showering or using the bathroom had become impossible. He was unable to interact with his mother, instead communicating using a pen and notepad. He wrote, "Even lying in bed alone with my thoughts, I have to be careful. Thoughts that are too positive or too negative can trigger a crash." Sam's neurologist said that during these crashes, he would feel like he was burning and drowning at the same time. Chronic fatigue syndrome is a little-known neurological disease that is difficult to diagnose. Symptoms include extreme exhaustion that doesn't improve with rest, muscle and joint pain, sleep disturbances, cognitive issues, and heightened sensitivity to light, sound, and other stimuli. And many patients struggle to be taken seriously. There is currently no cure for this. Samuel died on January the 30th. So, Samuel's case is not unusual. He does not have a terminal illness. He has a long-term illness. And this is something I can personally relate to. I struggled for many years to get the diagnoses that I have now. I've spoken openly with members in the past, and many of you know that I have endometriosis and an autoimmune disease. And members also often witness how much I struggle sometimes being here. Some members have spoken about pain relief. Well, sir, I can tell you something. Pain relief often comes with side effects. Impaired cognitive ability being one of them, and an inability to work properly. And as much as I would love to be able to take medication, and sometimes I do, sometimes I often avoid it because I want to work.
Actually we could just listen together because I might actually need to speak.
Sorry,
and
can you,
not
the
me to
person
do
on
anything
can
now.
you mute
Right,
that person?
Hugh.
Sorry? Can you mute that person? Sorry.
That was actually quite helpful.
Yes. Deputy
So often I avoid taking pain relief because it does affect my cognitive ability and it affects my ability to work. And so I would rather suffer than take the pain relief. So that there are nights that I pace in pain, that even pain relief, the strongest pain relief that I can be prescribed, doesn't even touch the sides. And so I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone. However, I'm a lucky one because I have more good, or should I say, bearable days than unbearable days. And I hope that I never get to the point that Samuel did, or that if I do, sir, and this isn't adopted, that it isn't at least for 3 years, as the minister said, that's when the next review would be. So, sir, based on that, I will be supporting this. Because what is the alternative for somebody who doesn't want to experience that anymore? Do they try and do it themselves? What happens if that potentially fails and causes more damage and suffering? So I want that choice, and I believe that others should have that choice too. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. Thank the Deputy for that speech, which I think is helpful when it's so personal. So I do have an issue with the slippery slope argument. I would say that we do have a slippery slope here, but we're thinking about it in the wrong way. It's not a slope that goes down, it's a slope that goes up. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll explain. So when women were given the vote in 1918 and 1919 in Jersey, there would have been many people around saying, oh, you know, this is a slippery slope. And you can see cartoons around. There's one in America warning about not just a slippery slope, but a slippery staircase where actually once the steps go past suffrage, and there's a famous photo I can send around of a child on the bottom step, and the first few steps are all fine. It's about marriage, etc., love, and aspiration. But then as soon as suffrage gets to that step, the woman then gets higher and higher up the steps, and it becomes all negative, loneliness, and the child is left behind. And the point I'm making there is that if there is a slippery slope here, it's actually the fact that the slope for progress going up is so slippery that it's really difficult to make any progress in this, because there are just problems that are put in the way. And actually what we need to start to think of with assisted dying is actually not of a slippery slope, but actually how do we include more people in the future? Because the opponents of assisted dying per se are the ones who are saying, oh, you know, this is a slippery slope, this is just going to get widened and widened. And I think they're absolutely correct in that. It will get widened because there's a historical imperative there, and I think there is a philosophical imperative which is about inclusivity. And we know that actually this, when it comes to human rights, when this becomes established, it will have to expand at some point. It happened with same-sex marriage, didn't it? I remember asking the questions when civil partnerships were being introduced, and saying, well, why don't we just allow same-sex marriage? Because that's what's going to happen anyway. And I had people who were campaigning for it sitting in front of me, politicians, saying, no, this is the way it's got to be done, because it's different. And I said, but we're going to get to same-sex marriage anyway, so let's just do it now. It's going to waste all this time, all this money with these laws. And actually, we need to get to a point where we treat people equally. And sure enough, it happened. And then we had all the fuss of actually having to repeal or debating, do we repeal same-sex partnerships, because actually are they going to be replaced by marriage? So I'm making these comments, by the way, in the context that I'm still undecided on whether I will ultimately be supporting this. But what I haven't heard today is that nobody's putting the other side of the argument. We can't simply say, because this is an inconvenient time, and because there are some people in our community who already don't like assisted dying, and this feels instinctively, emotionally like it's going too far, we're not actually debating the issue of whether this is right for people themselves. We do have recourse in this assembly to legal advice, and we often use that. What we don't often have access to, I would say, is ethical and moral advice, save for that we can get that from the Dean when he's here. But necessarily that will come from a particular perspective. That comes from a Church of England perspective, because that is the church that he represents, the church of the established church. But we can ourselves turn to other secular moral philosophers, and that's what I would like to do here. So there is a philosopher and it's a professor called A.C. Grayling, who's currently a professor of philosophy and principal of the New College of Humanities at North East University, London. And I know he used to be the professor at UCL in London, has written many books on moral philosophy. And he made a submission to the Commons call for evidence, so he put his written evidence in. He's called Anthony Clifford, if anyone wondered. I didn't know that until today, Anthony Clifford Grayling. And he makes the following case. It is quite brief, sir. At the heart of the case for assisted suicide is the argument that says, A, individuals have the right to choose the time and manner of their deaths, subject to the latter not causing unreasonable harm or inconvenience to others. And B, that if they cannot themselves administer the means of ending their lives, they have the right to assistance to do so. So I think most of us would probably agree with that. The majority have already passed in this assembly a form of assisted dying that is open to some. So he goes on to say that arguably the decriminalisation of suicide in the Suicide Act of 1961 implicitly recognised the right of individuals to terminate their own lives. I think that stands on its own 2 feet, and I would also acknowledge that we've also abolished we've decriminalised suicide in Jersey too. So such implicit recognition is inconsistent with refusal of assistance to individuals who cannot themselves administer the means to ending their own lives this refusal is discriminatory. The argument for the legitimacy of assistance to die in voluntary euthanasia does not rest on the point in the preceding paragraph, however. It more powerfully rests on the entailments, that is, not merely the implications of 3 rights that are enshrined in the European Convention of Human Rights, and the given effect to it by the UK by the Human Rights Act 1998 as follows. And of course, we've got our own equivalent of that in Jersey that recognises the CHR. The 3 pertinent articles are the Articles 2, 3 and 8, respectively, the right to life, to protection from inhumane and degrading treatment, and to privacy. He goes on to say that Article 2, a right to life, cannot mean simply a right to merely bare existence. It must mean at least a right to a certain minimum experience quality of life. For example, if someone were confined in a small cage and provided with nothing more than bread and water in perpetuity, this would scarcely be to accord him a life in any acceptable sense. The conception of a right to life of a certain minimum experience quality entails that when a life of suffering or disability has come to be experienced as below that level of quality, a level that the individual feels and society can rationally recognise as minimally acceptable, then in the light of the individual's right to terminate his life, he should be accorded assistance if he cannot himself implement the means of doing so. Members will realise I'm reading this out, so I would probably use more inclusive pronouns myself. Dying is an act of living. In the process of dying, an individual's rights are fully engaged as at any other time in normal life. The right to a minimum quality of life, that is, to a minimum quality of experience in any living act, ipso facto applies to the experience of dying. Shortening the dying process and making it easy and peaceful expresses consideration for what is meant by a right to life. In the fullest sense, a right to a minimum experienced quality of life. So I would ask members to consider that in the context of unbearable suffering, which is what Deputy Southern and others have been talking about. And then consideration turns to Article 3, where he says to deny assistance to somebody with a mature, considered and settled wish to die, but unable to implement the means himself, is to subject that individual to inhumane treatment. To require that such an individual should exist in conditions of, e.g. pain, incontinence, dependence and or indignity, where he or she does not wish to do so, is to subject, I'm putting in my own pronouns now, him or her to degrading treatment. One understands that Article 3 is intended to apply principally to prisoners or those of that bar of the law, but if these are to be protected, the more so are the rest, and chiefly anyone suffering so intolerably as to have a settled and considered wish to die. And then turning to Article 8, whereas the right to privacy is intended to protect individuals against undue surveillance and interference with public and private agencies, it likewise carries a more general entailment to a sphere or margin of essential self-determination and autonomy. Such matters as choosing one's domestic partner, having a family, enjoying privacy in one's affections and sexual life are integral to selfhood. Among these key self-determining liberties are arguably the most fundamental of them, is that of choosing whether one continues to live or not. If an individual has the ultimate right to decide this, and B, chooses to end his or her life and has the implicit right to do so, but is unable to enact the means of doing so, it is a denial of his right to self-determination as entailed by the privacy right to deny him that assistance. I'll pause there for a moment before I just read out the very short paragraph, because that's triggered something in my memory. Somebody who was opposing assisted dying per se said to me, "We don't need this now. People can already commit suicide." And I found that really problematic as a statement, because I think it completely disregards the fact that suicide is such an ailing thing to happen, because it is It's seen as the only way out for an individual so often that they get to a point where they may have made a rational or irrational decision to end their own life, sir, but it's their right to do that. But it leaves consequences for those who are left behind. And I think for somebody to say that, I think not only shows a lack of compassion, but also, I think, a disregard for what that really entails, what suicide entails. So the last paragraph that I'm going to read out is that the foregoing should be understood as applying to cases where an individual has what is rationally recognisable as a considered case for ending his or her life, which fully engages our sympathy and understanding. Terminal illness, intolerable suffering, a profound contrast between a life enjoyed or not, identifying cases where it is not merely transient depression or emotional upset following less severe life events, such as a divorce or a business failure. We understand that a clear-minded and settled intention to end life must be present and must survive careful examination by those from whom help is solicited. So, sir, I think those arguments have been put forward probably better than I could, sir, but I fundamentally believe that if we believe in autonomy, then we have to believe in the corollary of that. We have to also believe that if we have to follow that if we believe in compassion and that somebody is in intolerable suffering, suffering that can't be relieved by the administering of medication, and they've got to a point where they know that actually that suffering is never going to go away and they can't live with it anymore, what solutions do we as an assembly, do we as a society wish to allow those people to have, sir? And so it pushes me in the direction of compassion and respect for people's rights, sir. It doesn't make it an easy decision, but I've yet to hear of any argument that would persuade me at the moment of why we shouldn't be voting for this, apart from the fact that actually this isn't the right time, but that this may come later down the line. So if there are other members who actually are simply voting against this on the argument that this isn't the right time, but they do think that it is the right thing to do ultimately, I would like to hear from them and ask, when is it going to happen and how do we get to that point? Because I don't see it as a slippery slope where we're slipping down the bottom. I actually think that it's a slippery slope which is stopping us from getting to the top of where we want to be, and that actually we need a staircase, we need a route map, and perhaps we need an elevator to get there. But I'd like to just turn that slippery slope argument on its head, sir.
Sir, can I raise a point of order?
Yes. Fair enough, yes.
Can I ask for clarification around the invoking of Standing Order 84? Standing Order 84, I would like to invoke at the earliest opportunity. I understand that it requires an hour of the debate, but you have to give half an hour's notice. I don't know whether that half an hour notice can start at half an hour into the debate, if you see what I mean, or whether it has to start after an hour.
It starts now.
In that case, I'd just like to give notice that I would, if the debate continues.
So you're giving notice of your wish to propose a guillotine under Standing Order 84 in 30 minutes' time, and at that stage, I'll rule on it.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Who else wishes to speak on the proposition? Anyone else wish to speak on the proposition? In that case, I call upon the Deputy to reply.
Or if my request was noticed in the chat.
Sorry, do you want to speak, Deputy Doublé?
Yes, please, sir. Just very briefly to remind members that the Assisted Dying Scrutiny Panel did not scrutinise this particular point of principle, that our scrutiny was focused exclusively on the draft law as presented by the Minister. So therefore, we don't have any conclusions as a panel on this particular principle. And also to remind members that one of our amendments was for a review within 3 years of the service operating, which could take this point into account. And also just to very briefly make a personal point, that I have voted in favour of the route to in the past, sir. But I am going to abstain on this one today because whilst I still very much believe in the principle of this, I think that we need to let the service bed in and follow the same procedure that we did for any further extension needs to have the same additional detailed in principle debate like we did with the route one. So I'm going to be abstaining today.
Thank you, Deputy. Before Deputy Southern responds, I think I have a duty to ensure there's no risk of the Assembly being misled in relation to a constitutional matter. The bailiff is guardian of the Constitution, that has a very limited role in this chamber. But I'm going to ask the Attorney a question because something's been raised about royal assent. Attorney, ought the fact and outcome of this debate have any bearing on the giving of royal assent to the assisted dying law recently adopted by this Assembly?
No, the Privy Council will consider the law that has been adopted and submitted for royal assent and will advise His Majesty on the merits of that law, not on the merits of any possible future legislation.
Thank you. Yes, Deputy Southern.
Yes, thank you, sir, and thank you to members for staying on at this late hour in order to have yet another discussion about assisted dying. And I thank every member who contributed to the debate, even those who talked about the slippery slope, which I don't believe in either. And it seems to me that it is appropriate to discuss this particular issue. I think not me, because I won't be here, the members of our community will see this issue again, because I don't believe it will necessarily go away. And one of the adages I have that I often use with my colleagues is don't be afraid to lose. All that means is sooner or later you'll see it again in a slightly different form. And I think that day is to look forward to. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the appel called for? The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have the chance to cast their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been rejected. 8 votes pour, 34 votes contra, and 1 abstention. The last item is P50, Rent Tribunal, appointment of Chair, Deputy Chair and members, lodged by the Minister of Housing. I'll ask the greffier to read the proposition.
States are asked to decide whether they're of opinion, A, to appoint in pursuance of the relevant provisions of Part 4A of the Residential Tenancy Jersey Law 2011, as amended by the Residential Tenancy Jersey Amendment Law 2025, Residential Tenancy Law 2011 as amended, the following persons to act in the roles of either Chair, Deputy Chair or members of the Rent Tribunal for a term of up to 3 years. Chair Rose Colley, Deputy Chairs Jonathan Barham and Tim Hart, members Samantha Ainsworth, Matthew Beddoe, Luciano Brambilla, Joseph Carney, Stephanie Constantine, Sarah Godion, Samuel Putka and Sabrina Stewart.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Can I thank members as well for allowing me to take this at the end of this sitting, which I hope it won't take too long, and I hope it helps lighten the load for the next sitting, sir, as that's going to be extremely busy, as we know. But so this proposition seeks to appoint a membership for the new rent tribunal, which members will recall was approved in the new residential tenancy law, which we debated and approved in September last year. And under Article 13A of that law, a rent tribunal is to be established. So the Jersey Appointments Commission went through a thorough process to identify candidates for that, to have a long list, then a short list, then interview process, and I was very pleased at the end of that process to be able to agree completely with their recommendations to me for the membership that is proposed, which I'll come to in just a moment. But just a reminder for members that the Rent Tribunal is to have a very narrow remit, which is to consider whether a proposed rent increase that a tenant has received from their landlord is in line with the provisions of the residential tenancy law. And that's it. It's not to decide any other matters other than that. And it is not the intention that this tribunal is to be an overbearing body that makes these processes difficult, that we're hoping that it'll be an easy thing for tenants and landlords to engage with, and engage with very rarely, hopefully, because the mere existence of the tribunal and the law hopefully will see both sides know when the writing is on the wall and when cases are not worth proceeding with. Members will be able to see from the details of the membership that is proposed for this that there is quite a wide variety of experiences there. It's proposed that there be 11 members. Among those are people who are tenants, who are landlords, who are neither, and who have experience in property matters in some shape or form. I won't go through every single member on that, sir, because members can read that in the report to the proposition, but if I could, sir, single out the proposed chair, which is Rose Colley, a person that I'm sure several members of this assembly will be familiar with, but who is eminently qualified for that position, as you can see from her role as a Jersey advocate, but also some housing matters that she was involved in outside of the island too. And I'm very grateful that she and all the rest put their names forward to serve on this. Having such a breadth of people who will serve on the tribunal is also really useful for managing potential conflicts of interest, because we obviously won't need all 11 to sit for any tribunal hearing, but there being a breadth of members to it means that the judicial greffier can compile a smaller number of members to sit for a hearing, making sure that any perception of conflict of interest can be avoided, because there's plenty of people to choose from who will sit on that. So, sir, in summary, I'm extremely grateful to the Jersey Appointments Commission for their work on this, and very grateful indeed to those who put their names forward and those who have been successful, who I'm very pleased to recommend to give Jersey's Rent Tribunal hopefully a really good start with memberships that both landlords and tenants will have confidence in, will be impartial. And here's to hoping, sir, that the tribunal doesn't get used much, because relations between landlords and tenants end up going well under this new law, which I was very pleased to sign the enactment order for yesterday morning. So I make the proposition, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Is the proposition seconded? Yes, sir. Deputy Gorst.
So it just occurs to me that I should declare an interest as a landlord.
It's just the composition of a tribunal, isn't it? I don't think people need to declare an interest in relation to this matter. Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? Is the appel called for?
Why not say?
There we are. Appel's been called for. Members are advised to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the chance to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Announce the proposition has been adopted unanimously. 44 votes for. That concludes public business for this meeting, and I invite the Chair of PPC to propose the arrangements for the next meeting.
Thank you, sir. The next meeting obviously begins on Tuesday the 24th of March, and there are a number of continuation days. These will run until Thursday the 2nd of April, that is the week after. Now, we have done a questionnaire given to members about how they'd like to approach shortening the lunch periods, and I have decided indeed to make a proposition, sir, since we have plenty of time, a proposition that we shorten the lunch period so that it runs from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m, saving half an hour each day, and also that the meetings will no longer finish at 5:30 but will finish at 6 o'clock on each day. And hopefully, sir, that will reduce the length of the sitting by a whole day over that period. So I'd like to propose that now, sir.
Do you want to make that in two parts so members can vote
No,
on
no, sir, it comes
A
as
and B?
one.
It comes as one? Does it really come as one, does it? Take it or leave it. All right. I don't got it. I don't get a vote. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does someone want a debate on this, or just straight to the vote? Straight to the vote.
Sir,
Conor St Saviour, you're entitled to speak if you wish to.
No, just very quickly, sir. Would it benefit the Assembly if we sat on the Monday afternoon to get questions out of the way?
That's a different proposition. We'll start with this proposition. No, we'll go straight to the vote. The bill has been called for. We're voting on lunch 1 till 2, and the afternoon finishes at 6. Ask the greffier to open the voting. Ooh. I've no voting button. Well, I asked the greffier to close the voting. Announce that the proposition has been adopted. 42 votes for and 2 abstentions.
Deputy Rob Ward and Deputy Mezek.
Are there any other propositions?
No. I don't think members would approve, sir.
No. Right, are members content now to adjourn until 9:30 on the 24th of March?